Good morning, everyone. I'm Tershara, the National Policy Lead for WSP, and this morning I have four amazing panelists that are joining me today. I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with you, Tony.
Hi, good morning, everyone again. Tony Appleton, I'm the Offshore Wind Director at Burns & McDonnell.
Hi, Kelly Boyd. I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Regulatory for the Pacific region for Equinor.
Hi, good morning. I'm Walt Musial. I'm the Chief Engineer for Offshore Wind at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory.
Good morning, Dr. Ruth Perry. I'm the Head of Regulatory Affairs for Shell's Renewable Power Generation Americas team.
So yesterday there was a lot of discussion about what was needed in the next 1 to 2 years to build a sustainable offshore wind industry in California. Today I would like to focus on longer term needs. On April the 24th, DOI announced the new offshore wind lease schedule. So Walt, I'm going to turn to you and ask you, how is the lease sale in 2028 going to impact the long-term goals for California? And what are the challenges having the lease sale for California in 2028?
Well, just to put that in context, there were 12 auctions, I think, that were announced at the same time. And I think California's auction was kind of toward the tail end of that in 2028. So there were a lot of auctions before that. And so really the question might be like, well, is that, are we waiting too long to get into the next round of leases? And I think the issue really is that to establish market certainty and market size in California, we need more leases. Right now, the pipeline of leases is about 7 gigawatts. If you pack the turbines in, you might be able to get 10 into the current lease areas. But the AB 525 legislation has targeted 25 gigawatts. And we could have a debate about whether 25 gigawatts is a big market or a small market, but I think it's a bigger market than what we have right now. And to establish that market size, we need to show, I think the industry, the regulators, the state needs to show commitment that 25 is real. And so having the next auction, I think, is very important to establish the industry and to establish the location of all the sites so that the state planners can start to build, especially the grid, the location of where those points of interconnect are and where the grid is going to have to go. And I know in a lot of the sites right now, the grid hasn't been established yet, so we're going to have to build it. So I think it's very important that we have that lease sale as soon as possible. I won't get into the exact details of what the logistics are and how to what establish the 2028 timeline, but I think that it's very important.
Okay, thank you. So Kelly, as one of the developers in California, what are some of the challenges that offshore wind is facing in California with the state and federal processes?
I think there's two sets of challenges, and it's not necessarily with the state and federal processes. I'm going to refer back to Walt's comments. We can produce 10 gigawatts, and it won't be a factor of cramming them in. It will be a factor of how much of our lease areas can we develop, which does remain a little bit unknown right now, but fighting those types of things. He also mentioned transmission. If we don't understand the scale of what we're trying to do, then we're not going to develop sufficient transmission for it. So part of our issue with the state and federal process is being able to share that information broadly and being able to turn the information that regulators and decision makers have into action in time. He also mentioned 2028 as the next auction. Would be better if that was sooner for the whole Pacific region, because the type of economies of scale and scope, the supply chain capabilities, all of that hinges on scale, being able to build around this. That's where affordability comes in. I mean, we really need to start building this, not all at once, but sequentially, largely, in a large way, to make that work. I think state and federal regulators get that. I also think that we're the first in the Pacific Ocean with floating. And that's a challenge for regulators. It's something new. Equinor is the first of the 5 developers in the water doing surveys in our lease area. It's not easy to get there. It's not easy to stay there and maintain, be able to get your surveys done. I believe RWE and Golden State Wind are right behind us. Everything takes longer than you think. And I think federal and state regulators are having to learn things in real time, just like we are. I think knowledge share, I think absolute collaboration between industry, regulators, institutes like the labs, all of that, we have to keep doing it. It's not like we could say we got some information 2 years ago. We have to keep getting new information and sharing it to make it work. And I think people use this term streamlining. We don't need to streamline. We need to make things efficient. We need to do things concurrently. We need to do things with the best knowledge we have at the time, and we also have to have as much prudent forward knowledge as we can have. So I think those are the challenges, and believe me, we live them all day, every day, sometimes 12 to 16 hours a day. So.
Thank you. Do you think having the Gulf of Maine cell with floating and also the cell in Oregon would help the supply chain needs or constraints?
Yeah, actually, I was just talking to Stephanie Watson from Maine last night. I think those things help the distance between Maine and California.
Yes.
I think you're talking about two different supply chains. But to build up the Pacific supply chain, I think that's essential. And I mean, California's big, 10 gigawatts is big. The Oregon lease won't be as large, but when you look at ports infrastructure, I think, better regional transmission planning, that builds in a lot of efficiencies. So Washington, Oregon, California will have that in place. So I think those things help. Again, another lease in California before 2028 would probably be a good thing too.
Okay, thank you. So Ruth, tell us about the challenges with the port development strategy and what are some recommended solutions for the port development and waterfront facilities?
Sure, thanks, Tershara. I think it's not a surprise to anyone in this room that building anything in California is challenging. It's the same with the East Coast, right? Much of the ports are in the middle of populous centers. They're in areas that are specifically designed to the landscape that those ports are in. Some have narrow channels, some have to go, there's bridges and other access points that make entry challenging, which maybe, limit your ability to tow foundations, height restrictions, things like that. The diversification in the ports themselves in terms of space availability for marshaling and the construction is going to be a challenge, particularly in California because of the types of foundations, right? You don't have necessarily the components that you have with fixed foundations, and so you have to account for that. And there's a lot of variation in the space that's needed, the land that's needed, heavy lifting abilities, so these are all things that ports have to consider, but the challenge is there's not one port that has all the solutions, right? We learned that from the oil and gas community, and you see different ports, particularly, as you know, Tershara along the Gulf Coast, that service different parts of the supply chain. And whether it's the shipbuilding side, to the dry docking, to the marshaling of the large equipment, to the ability to do the heavy lifting that you need to install those components, there's a lot of transferability between, how oil and gas has managed kind of that utilization of ports that could apply here, particularly, I think, on the West Coast. So solutions, obviously, being from Shell as an integrated energy company, we certainly want to learn the best from the oil and gas supply chain and apply where it makes sense to supporting offshore wind. And I think that's an opportunity for ports to work together, to collaborate. As you're seeing that starting, I think, on the West Coast, it's certainly starting on the East Coast. But one of the challenges to also overcome is that ports may have to work in that regional context, and states are working, on the state local investment as part of the procurement, and that can create challenges. We're seeing that on the East Coast, right? Every state may want to have their port be first and foremost, but if the port doesn't have the capabilities for the supply chain and can't get that built in the time that the projects are ready to contract, then you have a disconnect, right? And so I think, it's prudent for ports and other parts of the supply chain to think about what do they have that's available and how can we work together? And then from the federal government, how can the federal government incentivize that regional work versus kind of putting port against port? And I think the state can also help play that part. And like Kelly said, with regional transmission, there should be a similar kind of regional port build-out approach for offshore wind.
Okay, I have a follow-up question. Sure. Does having local content help or harm the port strategy?
I think it depends on what you define with local content, right? So, you know, just as an outsider, not a leaseholder for California, but certainly involved in this in the Gulf of Mexico and the East Coast, there's different considerations with the northern leases versus Central Coast. There's more even accessibility, I think, for Central Coast to more utilize the California coastline and the different ports that are available. And you're already seeing some of the investments we've heard about in Humboldt, right? So I think it's both an opportunity for ports to meet the needs and build in offshore wind into their service capabilities. But again, you know, I think there has to be special consideration to what can the ports do and what's their extent to contribute to the supply chain. And this maybe also goes back to Walt's comment, right? When you're talking about a pipeline and where are we putting the investments? So in some regard, local investment can be in the form of workforce at the port, supporting programs at the port, safety programs. I think there's a lot of different avenues that could be explored, but then when you start demanding, I'll use the word demanding, that money goes to a certain port, then that can be very restraining in trying to build the necessary pipeline that you need. Because again, you're trying to maybe force something around peg into a square, anyway. Too much fun at Urban Roots last night. But you get it, right? You don't, and so I think local content, you have to be careful that you're not forcing something that doesn't fit, right? And allow the developers to help the state figure out what's the best way based on their project needs, as well as the longevity of what we need for the supply chain.
Okay, thank you. So Tony, collaboration will be key to success for offshore wind. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, collaboration. I mean, we've mentioned it already a couple of times on the panel already, so it's a word that's kind of flowing throughout all of the conversations. But I think collaboration is vital for the future of offshore wind, and you know, but it's on several levels and several directions. First of all, there's the kind of international, national collaboration between the California, Maine, again as been mentioned already, but also with what's happening in Europe, in Scotland, in Norway, in France, in Portugal. So there's some, you learn the lessons from what's going on over there. And secondly, the regional collaboration between, again, as we've mentioned, between California, Oregon, Hawaii, Washington, Alaska, you know, where's offshore wind going to stop kind of thing. So that collaboration needs to take place regionally as well, whether that's supply chain development or whatever it is, but it needs to, we need to be talking to each other. The next level of collaboration is at the local level, kind of coming down the various stages, and that's between the local stakeholders, understanding what each party wants, what each party is looking for, how they can work together. It's all part of the mix, as it were. And then lastly, I guess you could say the other area of collaboration is the other ocean users. So be that the military, you know, be that the oil and gas players, be that the telecoms people, you know, whatever it is, there's all sorts of communities out there that you know, use the oceans as well, not just offshore wind, not just oil and gas, not just military, not just transportation, container vessels, etc. We all need to play nicely together. But I guess the question then is, what does collaboration mean? What do we mean by the term collaboration? And that's, I think, what I've seen so far, and it's not just in the USA, it was the same in Europe a while ago. Collaboration is talking to each other, not at each other. We need to listen to what each other's points are and how we can work together and learn what makes people or the different areas tick and how they can play together, because effectively that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to play in the same sandpit together. And sometimes it's not that easy. So you know, we need to understand, we need to learn from each other, and I guess part of it as well is we need to educate each other. There's a big for me, one of the big things about offshore wind I've seen in the last sort of 7 or 8 years as I've been doing it in the US is education of the decision makers, because decisions can be made on a very, very small amount of knowledge. So that we need to educate everybody about what offshore wind means, you know, what it looks like, what it feels like. You know, when you try to explain to somebody what a 15 megawatt turbine looks like, you know, people have got no concept. But people, when you say, well, one blade's the length of a football field, including the end zones, it's like, wow. It's like, yes, exactly. And it's it's 15, 20 miles out of shore, 30 miles, 50 miles. You know, in the UK, we're building projects that are 300-400 miles out to sea. People just do not kind of get that. So I think it's about everybody working together and, as I say, playing nicely together, but learning and listening to each other is the key message, I think.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with that. So Kelly, back to you. What are the unique supply chain requirements in California for commercial industry development?
So I think you have to frame that around ports, egress and ingress, and then what exists in California today, and what are the difficulties in bringing new, like manufacturing, et cetera, here. So ports are the first thing. If there's no ports, there's no supply chain. Port of Long Beach, essential. Port of Humboldt, essential. You need staging and assembly. And they each have, you know, like we said, there's going to be 5 projects and they're in very different parts of the state to begin. So I think building around that, then that helps us identify what types of things. First, it'll be sort of a knowledge transfer coming here, and supply chain will come from elsewhere, and then we'll bring that and be able to have that base for the Pacific Coast. So I think the challenges are getting to scale, which means we have to have those ports developed on time. Tony said something that struck me, the collaboration here. There's some questions we should consistently be asking ourselves, and those are, you know, when we talk to regulators and they talk to us, when we talk to locals and they talk to us, it's help me help you. What do I need to do to help you? Which comes right back to me. And the other is, you know, the importance of listening. It's listening to understand, not listening to respond. So we know how we like to do things and what would work best, but listening to what are the challenges, what's possible. I think that's a unique situation. I think you can't have a supply chain without a trained workforce. That's a huge challenge, and the staging and training of a workforce so that you're not putting a lot of energy into training and getting people into apprenticeships for jobs that don't materialize for 6 years. We've got to shorten that time frame. But we also have to make sure we have a good framework in place, which means understanding how much of the supply chain is going to get here in time and what are the incentives here. I mean, we have to look at access issues around those ports, developable land. We also have to be very realistic about this climate crisis that we're in. Everything that goes with offshore wind has to similarly be addressing climate. So don't rush to do the easiest thing. Wait to do the best thing, but make sure we get it done in time. So I think those are the main challenges. I'm just going to close again and say no ports, no offshore wind, no supply chain.
Thank you. So Walt, what is the status of the technology in terms of readiness to deploy offshore wind systems in California?
Well, it's still a very new industry, and what we're talking about is floating wind. The fixed bottom wind industry has about 60,000 plus gigawatts installed already, and the floating industry is kind of an offshoot of that. It's using about 2/3 of the supply chain from the fixed bottom industry. So that part of the supply chain is starting to work, and we'll be utilizing that. So it's really, we're talking about the 1/3 that is related to the platforms that are floating and the mooring systems and the station keeping systems, and then the infrastructure that we use to install and deploy it, which is very unique. But once we get that built, I think that's really puts us on par with the other industries. But right now, globally, this is a global industry, so we're watching not just what's happening in California and not just what's happening on the East Coast. They're opening up floating lease areas this year in the Gulf of Maine, and that will be the next coast that has floating. But also throughout Europe, there's probably about, I think, 14 gigawatts that are planned, announced by developers to be installed by the year 2029. So right now, all the projects that have been installed so far would be classified as pilot projects, which are in the 50 megawatt range. We're putting in multiple turbines, but they're not cost effective on the balance sheets because they're small. They're not using serial production methods yet. And so that's the next leap that has to be made by this industry, is to go from the pilot stage to the commercial stage. And the commercial stage means serial production, and that's what, when Jocelyn was talking about flow-in, that's the exact purpose of that project, is to take those single turbine units that have been proven to work in various sites and to learn how to mass produce them and increase the throughput of those substructures at the port facilities that have been described here, and to start to make them in volume so that we can put, ports can service gigawatts per year, not just single units. And I think that's the big leap that we have to make now. That when we look at the crystal ball from Europe and Asia, I think that leap is going to happen in 2026, 2027, and that's well before development in California will happen. So I think we'll be able to take advantage of that here in this state as the industry moves toward commercialization. And that commercialization is the biggest lever that the industry has to reduce cost. That's by far what's going to bring the cost down. So I think we'll see that coming. Costs are very hard to predict at this point in time. We can understand what single units are going to cost, but the full-scale commercial costs are very nebulous at this time. And so hopefully we'll be able to put better resolution on that and very soon.
Okay.
Hopefully that answers.
Yeah, it does. Thank
Yeah.
you. So Ruth, how can we get to a more equitable, diverse workforce in California?
That's a really great question with multiple layers. So I'll take, from one perspective and then range into a few other perspectives. Workforce, like Kelly said, it's the backbone of the industry. You could argue, you need ports, but it's really the foundation is people. And providing those good paying jobs across the supply chain spectrum, right, from the developer to all the way down to the tier 3 and tier 4, depending on how you define. But it's more about what are the skills that are needed and how can those skills be transferred across major infrastructure projects, right? Offshore wind, I think you could argue in some capacity, is not unique. And so you could give the right skill sets. And so you have the offshore wind pipeline, ideally, you have the projects so those people can be successful for multiple decades and they can provide for their families. We heard quite a bit of that yesterday in terms of the range of interest across tribal nations to support. But there's also, it's funny because if you think about it, and I'm a marine scientist, oceanographer by background, when I told my parents that I was going to get out of, going to veterinarian school and go to oceanography and be a marine biologist, my dad said you never get a job, right? It's, you're going to go, swim around and dive and work at a dive shop. But marine science, look how many marine scientists are being hired to deal with a lot of these unknowns and how do we get forward to decisions, right? So I think we can't focus on one part of the workforce, but there's such a diversity in the offerings to support something like this in terms of dealing from how do we do it from a more climate equitable perspective, like Kelly said, to trades, labor, things in terms of the manufacturing, to why I'm sitting up here as Shell as a supplier, to creating the lubricants and the fluids that are running these machines and maintaining the lifetime of these machines. So I think that the equity is not only in how do we range for the people, but how do we look across the entire spectrum of what's needed for this industry across the 30 plus years. In specific to California, I think really starting early in different communities and identifying, listening to what those communities are interested in pursuing and how they'd like to pursue it, and then supporting initiatives versus not listening or just assuming what the workforce wants. And the other kind of analogy I'll give from learning over the 100 years that Shell has operated in the US, not everybody wants to work offshore. When you say we have all these great offshore jobs, but you have to ride a boat for a few hours, you have to climb at heights, once people start doing that, there's not many people that want to do that element, right? So if we only focus in trades and labor, you know, we need you, but we need you to work offshore. We have to be realistic about the workforce and the expectations of what people want, and figuring out how do we fit, because there's opportunity to fit across the spectrum. Then again, the equity piece is considering the age, starting young. Most of the work thinking about trades, community colleges, California has a lot of opportunity there. How can we develop at an early space and help people figure out what they're interested in, and then how do they get there? In addition to supporting, you know, the traditional, what we would consider a workforce for trades and labor, things like that, right? So it's really, I think, goes back to the collaboration point that was made of taking workforce from an understanding perspective versus what we think is best. And then we end up with a bunch of people that go to their first Hewitt training, and they're like, nope, I'm out. You know? Right. So that's kind of what I think about it. And it's an opportunity also to profile. I think we need to get smarter at profiling across the workforce in terms of where are those opportunities, and then what works best for those different communities that would like to participate.
Yeah, and I would like to follow up that I know that the University of New Orleans currently has a program there. They're offering a $5,000 stipend to be added on to the engineering program to get them ready for the workforce in the Gulf of Mexico. So
no,
that
and
may
I
be
think,
something.
yeah, that's a huge, I've worked in the California university system, many levels with colleagues, and I think there's a lot of opportunities to also think about local investment in terms of those types of stipends, not just setting up a program, but really supporting people and help shepherding them through where they want to go and how do we get them there versus you have to go on this track, right? Because that doesn't necessarily work in today's system. And then you end up not having people that want to stay in the industry, right? So that's the other angle of it.
Okay, thank you. So this question is going to be for all of you. Where do you see the industry in 10 to 15 years? I'll start with you, Tony.
It's going to be very interesting, I think. I think hopefully we will see all the stakeholders playing nicely together, back to the collaboration, everybody working together. It's not a competition. It's not us versus them. It's not oil and gas or offshore wind. It's not fisheries or offshore wind. It's we're there together and we're playing nicely together. Hopefully we can get over this initial, I guess, fear of the unknown, because you know what we've got to remember about offshore wind in California is it's new. We've kind of mentioned it. It's a new industry. You know, that's the thing. It is new. It's a generational change in terms of what's happening out there in the market, and we're still learning about it. It's like, you know, kind of back to Ruth's point in terms of the training, the opportunities. Offshore wind has got an opportunity for everybody in its supply chain. You know, it doesn't matter what you're interested in, it doesn't matter what your background is, it doesn't matter how you've been trained. You know, you can have 7 PhDs, or you can be a site laborer. It doesn't matter. There's an opportunity there for you in offshore wind. It really doesn't matter. And I think that's and also the big thing as well. Again, back to Ruth's point, is when people think about offshore wind jobs, they think out at sea. There's a huge amount of work that needs to take place on land. You know, the generation side of it, the transmission side of it, the cabling, getting the power ashore, getting the power to the load centers. There's a huge amount of infrastructure required, and that's, you know, existing skill sets. People don't kind of necessarily put that together. So I think, and hopefully by then there'll be an understanding about that. I think the education, I think I mentioned it before, the education levels will have increased. People will understand what offshore wind actually is and what it actually means and what it actually looks like as we start to move from what Walt was saying, from the demonstrator projects to scale projects. People to start seeing, we've seen a change on the East Coast. Once now that we've got South Fork and Vineyard 1 in the water, people are realizing actually what offshore wind actually means, away from the two demonstrators that were there before. I think there'll be a number of, the next thing will be a number of kind of agreed technologies, how we're going to do this, what it means. The floating technology, again, as Walt said, is still in the process of being developed. The floating cables, the floating substations are going to be required. That technology will have advanced to a point where we now understand how we're going to do it and how we're going to make it work at scale. And I think the other thing we'll start to see in 5, 10, 15 years' time is actually some the repurposing of older equipment that may have been, it's too small now for to do this or do that, so we'll repurpose it. It might, for example, we could use the same tower to put I'll pick a number, a 25 megawatt turbine out there, where at the minute it's only got a 15 megawatt turbine out there. So that kind of repurposing, the reusing of what's out there, because again, offshore wind globally is new. We haven't got to the point of decommissioning very much anywhere in the world, never mind in the US. The first projects in Europe are only just been decommissioned now from 25 years ago. So we're still understanding how that's going to work. That we'll have a much better knowledge of that in 5 to 10 years' time. What I'd like to say as well is, and I know I'm the Brit on stage, but I work for an American company. I'd like to see the US supply chain developed. The US has the opportunity to become a net exporter of equipment, not just an importer. We can develop the manufacturing skill sets over here. We understand how to manufacture things, but at the minute we're not. The US supply chain is faltering. Because, and that's both from an engineering side and from a manufacturing side. Why? Because everybody's trying to drive the prices down, so therefore you go to the people that have done it before that can do it cheaply, i.e. Europe or Asia. It is a new industry in the US. It takes time to get companies up to speed with what they've got to do and how they've got to do it. And what does take time means? It means money. But there's a pressure on the supply chain to bring the costs down. So what are the developers going to do? They're going to go to where it's cheaper, because it's a real battle. I'm glad I'm not a developer. It's a real battle the developers have got in terms of they want to develop the local supply chain, but they can't because of the cost drivers. And what the US market perhaps has to understand is there are going to be some perhaps cost increases before we start to see it come down, as we start to see the local supply chains kicking in. So hopefully in 5, 10 years' time, there will be a local supply chain there that is starting to export around the world, not just building US projects.
Okay, thank you. Kelly?
Yeah, so since I have to live the cost, the price, all of those things every day, I think my view in 10 to 15 years is more the human view of what this industry looks like. I think that's the important thing as a developer I should be looking at now. Before we got into California, as we were talking to folks, we developed this conceptual strategy of how are we going to do workforce supply chain? How are we going to bring community into this? Over a year now, about a year since we got our lease finalized, lots more conversations have taken place. And it turns out that, you can explain a concept and then you find out what's real and what can really work. And I don't know what's real today. We're still finding that out. I think we will, in 10 to 15 years, if I look at the West, and I believe that the West Coast and the Pacific and floating is crucial to addressing climate, and it's very crucial to having energy reliability, sustainable energy reliability. I'll look closer to 15 because I'm hoping in 10 years you and I and everybody else are on a platform and we're watching, power being delivered from shore. Right. But that we will have this economy in place here of people. We will have, as Ruth said, I think more of the jobs will be onshore than offshore. But a very diverse workforce, really well-trained people with opportunity to do anything. And then this is the first stage of what we've built here. I'd like to say we will have made progress on climate thanks to offshore wind, and that we will continue to do it. I think affordability, cost effectiveness, all of that comes with building just like we did with other industries, building it large so that it's the right size, and then sustaining it, folding it into the system. This will be very adaptable in a platform that has storage, that has hydrogen, that has a lot of other options. But it is people who will build it, it is people who will use it, and it's people that will sustain it. So I think that I'd like to be here 15 years talking to folks about how offshore wind helped, them build their families, their community, they have cleaner air. So that's where I see it.
Great. Walt?
So 10, 15 years, I see a mature supply chain having been built, which we're building right now, which includes the infrastructure for ports and the grid, not just California, but worldwide. I think we're working on that now. And with that, I think that standardization of the turbine size, I think, is going to be part of that, because once we build that supply chain and we build the infrastructure that goes with it, the capabilities of that supply chain need to be preserved for a long enough time to recover those investments. And so the turbines will be, I think, level off in size, and they will work within an envelope of technology capabilities that the supply chain can deliver. And that's how we're going to get costs to come down, by staying there and to get good at it, get good at making about 1,500 turbines for California to meet the 25 gigawatt goal. And with that in mind, I think we will see cost reductions come down that are in line with what I think the floating windshot goals are. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah.
And Ruth?
Yeah, for not repeating everything, so I'll just say ditto to that. But, to be a little self-serving and cheeky here, I would like to be fishing off of one of my project turbines that's installed in the water. If you've never fished an offshore structure, you need to add it to your bucket list. But as a scientist in my night job, I am looking forward to the opportunity. Kelly pointed out that climate change is a real thing. Anybody that has worked in marine science sees this. As a data observationalist myself, we've seen this across the Gulf of Mexico, East Coast, and certainly West Coast, right? Living through those storms. The other opportunity, though, is with these projects comes a smart approach to monitoring and mitigation. And in those requirements, we're going to collect so much information about the system as a whole that's going to inform conservation, marine resource management. I'm very excited about that, to see in 10 and 15 years these kind of long-term programs and the fruitfulness of the collaborations like POWC that was announced yesterday, really working together to collect information about these systems to do better across the ecosystem, in addition to addressing the climate challenges that we need through energy diversification. So I'll take that angle of it, and then ditto to, of course, everything else that was said on stage.
Okay. It looks like we have about a minute and 40 seconds, so we have a couple of questions. How can the offshore wind industry build long-term relationships with local communities adjacent to lease areas? Kelly?
With 1 minute, I'll go back to that. Before we had a lease, for years we were here talking to people in local communities. Once we had a lease and we knew literally what community we'd be in, we're out there talking, working with them. How do they view their community? And obviously, when you talk about offshore wind, it's a really wide swath. It's our lease area is the farthest west, sits north of Morro Bay, kind of off the coast near First Castle, and there's 2 other lease areas. That's a lot of land. That's a lot of area to cover. It's about identifying what this means for them, what their vision of the future is. Would they like, one of the problems in California is if you live in a small coastal area, your children can't afford to stay there. So, how many generations get to participate in this? What are their concerns, their needs? Ruth keeps mentioning, fishing, all the other activities. There are tribal fisheries, there's commercial fisheries, there's sport fishing. None of those things should be altered by offshore wind. They should benefit from offshore wind. And that's where the lease areas were designed to minimize any negative impacts. I think the type of science that we'll be acquiring, I think that local communities, we're on the Central Coast, there's a lot of community colleges and universities all around there that can benefit, and then we can benefit from. So it is really an ongoing conversation, collaboration, identification of how this benefits the region economically, how it helps shape their vision of who and what they want to be, and then we are part of that region for generations to come. So I think long term, that's exactly what it is, and maybe it won't be me, maybe it'll be one of my kids that stays with this project forever, so that would be great.
Right. Well, thank you all. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.